This table here, or the information in the source file, has some issues. And if you compare the overall look of this table with, for example, the second query here, then you see that we have this green bar here below our column name, so this bar here. And if I hover over this bar, we see that we have 100% valid data in this column. The same applies to all the other columns in this query here. In the third query, this bar is not complete. We have a little gap here at the end, and if I scroll again over it, you see that we have 99% valid data, but we have some empty information in our data. Now, empty rows are also something you typically want to avoid in your finished or prepared data. Therefore, we should remove these empty rows. This can be done easily, but before we do that, let me quickly show you the View ribbon here, because there you can find more about the columns and the corresponding values these columns contain. For example, we can select this column quality box here, this one. This enhances this menu, and with that, you immediately get an overview of the values stored in your columns. You can also add this column distribution, option here, which doesn't work here in this query with the empty rows, but it does work here in the second query, for example. There you, for example, see in here that we have in our data 6 distinct values and 0 unique values. And now you might ask yourselves, well, how can this be if this column contains the data from 2020 up to 2029? Because actually, these should be 10 distinct values then, and not 6. The reason for this is that this information here in this column analysis helper, so to say, only includes 1,000 preview entries. You see this if you hover here, that we have 1,000 values on which our analysis is based on. Therefore, this doesn't analyze the entire dataset, just the amount of data that is previewed here in our query editor. Nevertheless, this is a great helper to see if we have a general problem here in our data. Finally, besides the column quality and the column distribution, you can also select the column profile here. This gives you an even better overview of the content of your data. You see information like the count, nothing new, and also the distinct values, but also things like the minimum value or the maximum value. Again, if you click onto the time column, therefore, you see that the minimum value is 2020 and that the maximum value is 2025. Therefore, this is again related to the limited amount of preview data in here. What you can, of course, do though here is you can simply go to the filter once again. And as you see, by pressing on to load more, that we have 10 values in total. You could just unselect, for example, the first 5 years. And by then switching to another query and then going back, because with that the information will be reloaded, so to say. So if we then again select the column profile and go to the time column here, then you see that you get an overview of the remaining years, or not all of them, but some of the remaining years. So with these column tools, you can get great insights into your actual data. There is one thing to be aware of though, because we actually could remove that filter from the time column now, because we don't have to limit our years here in this column. But if you check out the applied steps once again, you can only see one filtered row step. Now the thing is that although we have one step here only, we actually have 2 active filters. You can see this right here in the time column and right there in the log ID column. If I would now remove this filter, which I don't want you to do at this stage, like this, then our filter in the time column is gone, which is nice, but the same thing applies to the log ID column. And this means if I check the filter here again, then by scrolling down, you see that no data is activated once again. So we can, of course, unselect it and bring the filter back in here, but be very careful when activating multiple filters one after another, because then removing the applied step won't work as intended because all filters will be removed. What would work though is that if we, for example, rename the time column, just to test here, I just want to demonstrate something quickly. So we got a step in between our filter. And if we would then again apply a filter here, for example, exclude the year 2020 and do this, then we have two different filters set, filtered rows and filtered rows 1 here. It's important to see though that the currently active filter indicated by the symbol is only the one for the test column, because the filter for the location ID is the one that is only active if I select the corresponding applied step. So you always see this filter symbol we talked about if the currently active step is the one where this filter is applied. So applying multiple filters at the same time can lead to this, well, slightly confusing behavior. Therefore, be careful about this. And also note that if you activate only one filter, as we did it here, then you also get the gear wheel symbol next to the applied step. So if you click onto the symbol, you can have a look at the filter mechanism that is active here. If I would again add another filter, for example here in the age group column, press load more, and then exclude one of this data, of this incorrect data here, by the way. We'll dive into this a bit later in this module. So if I confirm this, then this gear wheel symbol is gone because now we have multiple filters being active, and therefore you have to manually get rid of these filters again. Alternatively, you can of course remove the filter right here and also this renamed column option. So this information is very important to keep in mind when working with filters. Nevertheless, coming back to our topic where we actually talk about the analysis of the values and about removing empty values, then I will first remove our different column analysis options here, because I think these are a bit distracting here. And I'll go back to our third query now with our empty data. This can be easily fixed by selecting one of these columns, because each of these columns contains these empty fields, so to say. So we go back to the home ribbon and there again to the remove rows menu we already had a look at. And now in remove rows, we simply remove our blank rows. By doing that, the blank rows of this specific column will be deleted. And as I said, this will then also be applied to all remaining columns. And therefore, we now have a fully green bar for all of our columns in our dataset. Dataset is not correct here though, because the clean rows refer to the, well, third query here, or also to the second query. But if we jump to our first query again, you see that the first two columns have a full bar here, so we have 100% valid data. But for the third and the, well, remaining columns here, the bar is not full. So this means that for some country here, we obviously don't have data for all years. Now, turns out that if we scroll down a bit here in our data, we have an issue with our China data, so to say. Here, this seems to be some, well, incorrect data, which is part of our data set. Obviously, this was added by myself on purpose for demonstration purposes. Nevertheless, you always have to be careful when working with your data, when preparing the data, because you see we have two valid columns actually here, but the other columns, well, don't contain valid data. Therefore, what we can do now is we can, of course, again use the remove rows option here in the third column. So we select the column, go to remove rows, and here remove blank rows. This would be totally valid here. And remember, if we remove a blank row from one column, this specific row or the values in this specific row will be removed from all other columns too. Alternatively, and that's also totally valid, we can of course also use a filter. So let's open the filter menu right here. And the blank value is already indicated at the second position here. So by unselecting the blank value and by confirming this, we see that our empty values are gone. Nevertheless, our bar is still not fully complete. That's the bug we talked about already. So if we quickly switch to another query and then jump back to the initial one, this is reloaded and shows now 100% valid data. With this, we now did our first preparation steps from a row perspective. This means we can now also save our project once again with the Save option here in the upper left part of the query editor. We won't apply the changes now, so we won't load the information into the data model. So we press Apply Later here, and with that, our data is saved. A little information in between here though, if I would now close the query editor, so just with a normal closing of the window here, I again get asked if I want to apply the changes now, so I'll select Not Now here. And this will now bring us back to the actual data model. We talked about this in the course already. We could now load the information into this data model with apply changes. I won't do this now, so if you want to stop the project at this point, for example, you can just close the current Power BI desktop project. And then you can, of course, reopen it by opening the file in the corresponding folder where you saved your Power BI desktop project.